All right, happy Saturday. Yes, I'm here in my shop working for you guys on my Saturday. I just want to kind of give you a better visual of what we're talking about, which is brakes. Okay, so I'm going to make this quick and I'll upload it, and this will help you guys, and we can talk about this maybe next week. All right, so there is our master cylinder right there. Okay, you see the black cap with the DOT3. We know what DOT represents. The number 3 represents basically the quality of the brake fluid. We'll get more into that. And there is our reservoir right there. And if I shine a light, we can see, you might be able to see the fluid level is getting pretty low. Okay, it's below this seam right here, if you can see in there, and I'll show you why. Okay, so there's actually on the side, you might be able to see it, there is a minimum and a maximum line for the fluid level. Okay, and there are the brake lines that are coming out. Okay, so these two lines come out, and I'll explain more about that in a bit. I'll lift it up and I'll show you the brakes. All right, so I pulled the left front wheel off, and I'll show you a few things here. There's our brake caliper right here. Okay, and the brake caliper is actually bolted to what's called the anchor. Okay, this is the caliper anchor. It's what holds the caliper. And you can see that it sits over the brake rotor, and if you look on mine, it's very rusty and old. And then I removed the 6 wheel nuts and removed the wheel so you guys could have a look at what's going on in here. Okay, and then over here, there is our bleeder screw. It has this rubber cap on it to protect it because it's very small. All right, and then this is our brake line. Okay, so there's our rubber hose, and we all remember why they make the hose out of rubber from the wheel to the frame of the vehicle. And then if we follow that brake line, here it is here. You can see how small it is compared to my finger. Okay, and that brake fluid goes up to the master cylinder. And if we want to look at the inside of our brake pads, they have this window here, and we can look in there. Okay, so I'm going to remove this caliper. I have to take this 15 millimeter and this 15 millimeter bolt out, and I will give you a better look at what's going on in there. Okay, take note of these funny looking bolts right here as I pull it out. Okay, so there's the lower one there with the rubber boot on the end, that black little rubber band on the end of it. And here is the top. These are called the slider pins. Okay, these are called slider pins. You see how shiny they are, and they have some grease on them to make sure they stay slippery in there. Okay, I'll talk to you guys a bit more about that in a second. So what we have going on in here is we have our brake pad, which is right here. This is the rotor right here. So if I turn this, okay, you see the rotor rotating. That's what I'm doing. So that's the brake rotor. You can see rotating in there. That's my brake pad. That's the backing plate of the brake pad right here. And this is the piston right here. Okay. And as the brake fluid travels through the hose under pressure, it goes into the caliper and it pushes this piston out against this pad. This pad makes contact with the brake rotor, and in turn, the caliper slides on these pins here, and it actually moves back and forth. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to push the piston back, and I'm going to show you what happens. So I'm going to pry on the inside of the outside of the rotor, and you're going to see this piston go back. Actually, maybe I'll do it right here. So that's piston right there, and I'm going to push it back. Now what I'm doing is I'm pushing the piston back into the caliper, and in turn, that is pushing the fluid back up into the reservoir. And this will make it easier for me to take the caliper off. Okay, so again, when you step on the brakes, the piston pushes the pad against the inside of the rotor, and in turn, because of the reaction, the caliper wants to go that way. And that's why we have these slider pins, to allow the caliper to move back and forth and slide on those pins. Okay, and that way we should have 50% braking here, 50% braking done on the inboard. So when I pull this off, you'll see the brake pads in there. So I take the caliper off. It's pretty heavy. I don't want to let it hang on the hose like that. Okay, so what I do is sometimes I'll wrap it up into the spring here and I'll let it hang like that, okay, because we don't want it to let it hang. You see how rusty it is? So inside there, let me get you a better look here. There is our piston. Okay, so it's like a cup. And then this rubber boot right here keeps the dust and all the debris out. And inside here, there's a rubber seal, okay, that keeps the fluid behind the piston. Because if the seal in here leaks, the fluid is eventually going to leak out and we're going to have a bad brake pedal and a bunch of complaints from the customer. There are my brake pads. Okay, so we have 2 brake pads, as I mentioned. We have a, let me get the light in a good spot here. We have an outboard pad and we have an inboard pad. So what we want to do is I'm going to pull these off, and this is our anchor. Okay, so this is what holds the pads and also supports the caliper, sits on the anchor. A lot of different designs out there, but this is a very common one. Okay, I pulled the brake pads out. So these are what they look like, and you can see that's the material that I have left. The friction material is this, and this friction material is bonded to what's called the backing plate of the pad. Okay, so this is the outboard pad, and this would be the inboard pad. Do you know how I know which one is the inboard pad and which one is the outboard pad? And then we have some information about the pad. We're not going to get into that. Now, there's also one other thing I want to talk to you about is this little band, this little metal tab right here. And you can see where it sits in location to how the pads wear. So I'm going to ask you guys if you could tell me what you think that little metal tab is and what would happen to it and what it would do as these pads wear down to its level. Okay, so these pads are getting pretty low. There's maybe 15% material left on them. And if you guys recall, the fluid level in the reservoir up top under the hood was low. And the reason it's low is that's how we know if we need brakes or not. That's an indicator. So what happens as the pads wear out, the piston has to come out further to make contact against the pads and the rotor. So as the piston comes out further, that means more fluid has to come down through the line to the caliper. And as more fluid comes from the reservoir, the level will go down. Okay, so when I open the hood and do an oil change on a car, I always look at the fluid level in the reservoir, and if it's low, I get excited because it might need brakes, which means I make more money. Okay, so further about these pins, the pins sit in the anchor like that, and they are bolted to the caliper right here, and they actually slide in and out of the anchor like that. And that's what allows the caliper to slide back and forth, and so we get equal braking on the inboard and the outboard. Okay, so I actually have ordered a set of brakes, and maybe I'll do them next week, and I'll show you what we do when we perform a brake job. But remember, I told you guys last week about when we do a service, for example, we always want to look to make sure that the pads are wearing evenly. And these ones are. You can see this one has a little bit more meat left on it than this one. So that means that this pad here is doing a little bit more of the work than the other pad. It's pretty good though. Okay, but again, we want 50-50. So the other thing we have to watch out for is if the pads are worn evenly. If each pad is worn evenly, we want to make sure that there's as much material left here as there is here. And if we look at these, that's pretty good. It looks like it's maybe a little bit thicker down where my thumb is. And that one's pretty good, because what that is an indication of is the pads are not worn. If each pad is not worn evenly across its whole surface, then what could be happening is if one of these sliders could be seized inside. We call these sliders or pins. They could be seized. One of them could be seized inside here. And if it's seized, then the whole caliper won't be able to move, only the bottom. Okay, so we'll get uneven brake wear. So that's an indication of a problem. Okay. Caliper anchor, when we do a service, the other issue is that the pads could be seized in the anchor. You can see they sit on these metal shims right here. I could peel this shim up. Okay, and what happens is it gets rusty under here and here, and then the pad gets seized on the anchor, and then it can't move back and forth freely. And that is another problem that we come across. So when we do a brake service, we always make sure it's nice and clean here. And we always make sure that these pins can move nice and freely. Okay, so that's our caliper. There is the piston inside the caliper. There is the dust boot to keep all the debris and water and guck out from there. And then inside here, there is a rubber seal that wraps around this piston to keep the fluid behind the piston and push the piston out. Okay, there is our brake hose we talked about, and then there is our bleeder screw. So whenever we open up, repair a brake line, okay, or open the system, we get air in the system, we have to bleed the air to remove the air, okay? Okay, I'm going to go underneath and show you underneath. So there's the brake line. You can see how the brake line goes up in there. Let my camera focus here. Piece of crap phone. It'll find its way. And I'll just show you the brake lines that travel to the rear. So the brake lines go up in there. There they are, right there above the light. Okay, the two black lines right there, these two here. Okay, so if we follow them, they go all the way. The other lines you see here, these are the fuel lines. Okay, because the gas tank is that big black tank right here that holds about 100 liters of fuel, I think, on this. Maybe not that big, but anyway, so we follow these brake lines, and there they go. And these brake lines are in really good shape. See how they're not rusty at all? Brake lines are rust out because look where they're located. All the slush and salt gets up in there. There they are. You see them there. You see them here. There's the brake hose. Okay, there's the hose for the left rear, and there's the caliper inside there. There's the brake hose for the right rear, and there's the caliper inside there. This caliper is a little different because it has the parking brake. Okay, so I'll see if I can get you a shot of the caliper. That's the caliper there. Okay, you can see the brake hose at the front there. And then this black cable right here is the parking brake, and it goes all the way, here it is right here, and it goes all the way to that caliper that's located in there. And those are the brake lines and the brake hose that carries the brake fluid to the rear. Okay, so I'm going to try and put it back together while holding the camera. So remember, when we replace the pads in the rotors, we get new pads that are a lot thicker. So we have to push the piston back into the caliper, or into its bore, B-O-R-E. That's what actually the caliper sits, the piston sits in the caliper bore. So we have to push the piston all the way back into the caliper. And what that does is it pushes the fluid back into the reservoir. So I mentioned earlier about how my fluid level is low. So you're never supposed to top up brake fluid unless, of course, we have a leak. I don't have a leak. The reason mine is low is because my front pads are worn out. Okay, so once I replace the pads and I push the pistons back, it's going to put fluid back into the reservoir, and then my level is going to be good again. Okay, so what I would do doing a brake job or a brake service is I would also pull the anchor off, and you can see the bolts here that hold the anchor on over the rotor. I'd pull the anchor off, and I would pull these are called shims, okay, that the pads sit on. I would pull the shims out, and I would scrub. I would put some grease there. Same with up here. I would make sure these pins are nice and free. Okay, it is nice and free. That's good. I'd clean them and put some more lube on them. I'd get my brake pads, and this is the outboard pad. Make sure the clip is sitting in properly. Okay, and you see how nice and free that is? That's good, okay? That's what we want. That's why these pads are worn pretty evenly, because the pads are nice and free in there. They can move evenly when you step on the brakes and release the brakes. I know this is the inboard pad. You know how I know? I asked you earlier. Because of the circle mark right here that's caused by the piston. Okay, so you can see the mark. It's caused by the piston. So the inboard pad, make sure we put it the right way. The inboard pad will sit. Make sure the clip is down. The inboard pad will sit there, and it moves nice and freely. So that's good. If it moves too freely, you see how I have up and down movement? So that can be bad, because that can cause a rattle whenever I hit a bump in the road. Okay, so that's a little bit too loose, but I'm not too worried about it. This is my piece of crap car. So then what we would do is we'd make sure the piston is all the way back. Also, guys, you'll notice that this brake hose actually has grooves. Okay, you can sort of see the grooves along the length. The reason they put grooves is to help you identify that you didn't twist the hose. If I put this caliper on with the hose twisted like that, that could be bad, because as I turn the wheel, the hose could kink, and then the fluid's either not going to get to the caliper or it's not going to be able to return. So the reason they put the grooves is so that you can see that the lines or those grooves are straight. Then you know that the caliper is not twisted. So then I put the caliper over the pads and over the anchor like that. So it's sitting down. I have to get my rubber dust boot here that keeps the sliders free of dirt. That one. And then this one down here like that. Then I would lubricate my slider pins. Okay. And this one went up here. Should slide in there relatively easy. Like that. Then I get my other one. And I put it in there like that. I want to show you, you see the little black, okay, that's a piece of rubber. That's like a rubber sleeve. And the purpose of why there was only one slider with this rubber sleeve on the end, the other one didn't have one, is that piece of rubber, what it does is it sort of absorbs the initial movement of the caliper, because when you step on the brakes, obviously the calipers going to want to roll with the rotor. So what that piece of rubber does on the end of this slider is it just absorbs a little bit of the movement of the caliper when you step on the brakes. Okay, and then of course the brake rotor, I would replace this rotor. You can see the different color. That's because they get really hot. Okay, it's stopping a 4,000 pound vehicle, so they get really hot, and look where they're located: water and slush and dirt. So these guys really go through a lot of abuse. That's why it's important that we make sure they're working properly. Now, normally I would tell you to torque these to a certain specification, but that's not why we're here today. We'll talk about that some other day maybe. Okay, and then we talked about the bleeder screw, which is right here. If we were bleeding the brakes, what we would do is take this rubber protector off, and there it is there. And you'll see that it has a little hole in the end of the bleeder screw, and that's what lets the fluid out. So it jams when we tighten it. It jams down against the bottom of it, and this bleeder screw has a hole in it all the way through it. And when we loosen it, it unjams from the bottom, and it allows fluid to come out of that bleeder screw. Okay, and then of course the brake hose that goes up there, and there's our connection there. Okay, you can see the line nut. Okay, so there's a flare at the end of this line that connects the brake line to the brake hose. Side note, here's my tire. There's the date, 25/15. There's the DOT, and this is all the other information. To be honest, I have no idea what it means, maybe where the tire was built or whatnot. Okay, this is my winter tire. There's a snowflake in the mountain, 103H, load rating, speed rating, tire size 225 millimeters wide. The height is 60% of that. It's a radial tire, and it's the rim size from there to there of 17. Okay, so there it is there. This is our wheel. I put it up. I started the wheel nuts. These are the wheel nuts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is my air gun, and that gray socket, if you will, right here, that's called a torque stick, and this is the socket. These wheel nuts are 19 millimeters, so I have a 19 millimeter socket on here. This is called a torque stick. Some of you might know what a torque stick is. If you don't, what happens is we have to make sure we tighten this wheel evenly, and that all these wheel nuts are tightened evenly. Okay, so we don't want to just use a big bar and tighten it until we think it's tight. We use what's called a torque stick, and this torque stick will ensure that each wheel nut is tightened to the same amount. And this torque stick is rated for 100 foot-pounds. So this torque stick is going to make sure that each one of these wheel nuts is tightened to 100 foot-pounds. When we tighten a wheel nut, we tighten it in a star pattern. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, or wherever you start, you go opposite. And that will make sure the wheel is tightened evenly. 100 foot-pounds, nice and even, okay? And then I have my, my crappy looking hubcap that sits over like that. And then I take this, I'm missing the plastic nut, and this is what holds the hubcap onto the vehicle. Okay, so these are just plastic, so you don't want to use the gun on these. Just hand tight like this. And there we go. Okay, so now that should be on there. Still a little loose, but I don't care. It's not going anywhere. Remember I told you guys about the various ways that we test brake fluid for contamination or for water content. Okay, so this is a brake fluid tester, and you can see on it, if my phone will focus for you, the different numbers. So 0 means the battery's dead. 1 to 2% water contamination is okay. There goes my phone again. Stupid thing. That says 3 to 4 means it's no good. Okay, so there are the probes. So I took this brake fluid here and I put some in the lid because I can't get this tool into my reservoir to show you. So we're going to do it in here. So there's the button we push right there. Put it in. Okay, so it's 2% water in there, and that's okay. And the funny thing is, this is brand new brake fluid that came right out of this container. So why there's already 2% in there, I don't know, but whatever. Anyway, just to show you, this is one method of testing brake fluid. Okay, Princess Auto. Some of you might remember that this container might look familiar. That's Princess Auto. Okay, so lastly, let me get the light here. I'll use this light. Okay, so lastly, just quickly, the reason we only have 2 lines coming out of this master cylinder, and you can see that's where it's bolted to this guy there, which is called the brake booster. Okay, sorry about that. So we have 2 lines coming out of the master cylinder. And these lines, I'm not going to try to confuse you too much, but I just want you to know why there's only 2, because there's obviously 4 sets of brakes on this thing, right? 1 at each corner. So this unit with all these lines that come out, this is called the ABS. Now, some of you guys might have heard of ABS, which is anti-lock brakes. And that prevents, this guy here is a hydraulic unit with a computer, and it prevents our wheels from locking up when we step on the brakes, because we'll talk more about that. But that comes down to friction. When the tires lock up on the road, what happens to your ability to control the vehicle? Okay, so that's the question. Where'd I put my light? Here it is right here. So the 2 brake lines come out of the master, and they actually go into the ABS unit. I'll try and show you. One line right here, and the other line is right here, okay? You can see how they're threaded in, and the 4 lines come out. Okay, so here's the question. I talked to you guys about diagonal split. Here's one line that comes from the master. Let's say it's this one here. Okay, this line goes all the way back, it loops around, and it attaches right here. This is the main feed line into the ABS unit, and these 2 lines go to the wheels. So what 2 wheels could these lines possibly go to? Okay, there is the other line, brake line that comes from the master. What would these 2 lines go to? Okay, so that's the question. So there it is, there's your master. Now remember, I pushed the piston back in that caliper, so the fluid level probably went up a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but sometimes if you shine a light on it, okay, well anyways, if you can't tell, I'll tell you right now, the fluid level did go up a bit because I pushed the piston back in, which pushed the fluid all the way back up into the reservoir. Take the cap off. That's what it looks like down in there. All right, guys. All right, my scrap metal bin. These are an old set of brake pads we replaced. This is my friend's house. This is his garage. He's a retired gentleman and tinkers on cars all day. Okay, so there's an old set of pads. You see that shape right there? Do you think that was the inboard pad or the outboard pad? Okay, here's the other pad that goes with it. You see how worn? Oh, one more thing. You see this groove cut into the pads? Same with that one. Anyone know why there's grooves there like that? Why essentially the pad is actually 2 pieces of friction material bonded to the backing plate or glued? Okay, so there's one pad and there's the other one. Okay, you notice the shape here and there compared to the shape that's in the back of this one. Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to show you guys, look at all the lines we have here of all different sizes. Okay, there is a brake line, and this line is 3/16 of an inch. Maybe you guys have learned the fraction system, maybe you haven't. Okay, but this is a roll of brand new brake line. You can see it all. Here's another roll of brand new brake line because we replaced them. They rust out and they leak. And this line here, whatever it's from, there's the flare. So that looks like a double flare. And then down here is the line nut. So you can see that that nut pushes against that flare when we tighten this line into whatever it's tightening into, and that flare is what seals the fluid from leaking out. So you can see compared to my finger here, just how small that opening is for that brake fluid to travel from the master cylinder to the left front wheel, to the left rear wheel, and to the right rear wheel, and to the right front wheel. This is a flaring kit. This is how we make those flares in those steel lines. And it looks like this. Yes, it's quite the assembly. This kit is probably $500 brand new. And it comes with all these different size for different brake lines. See that? So this is one of the pieces we would use for 3/16 brake line. And here is the other part of it. So we would put it in this tool, we would feed the line through the block, okay, and then this tool, we pump it, and this would come out, the line would be in here like that, and as we pump it, this tool here, nope, that's not the one, I believe it's this one right here, okay, the line sits in that tool, it sits in here, inside the block, okay, like this, like that, I think. Yeah, sorry guys, not a very good demonstration here. Yeah, it would sit like that, and then like that, and then the line would go over the end of that little nipple right there, and then we would just compress this tool, and that is what flares the line to make the end of it the shape it is. All right. Okay, so lastly, because we pushed the pistons back into the caliper, well, we only did the one side for demonstration, but when you do a brake job, if you do the front both sides or the rear both sides, you don't just do one side. So that means what would happen is if we pushed both calipers, both pistons back into their caliper, we have to pump up the brake pedal. You see how low it went? Okay, because what we're doing is we're pushing the piston back out. Now, you see how high it is compared to the first pump? So we are pushing the pistons back out of the caliper bores to make contact with the pad, to make contact with the rotor. So if I had started this vehicle up and just put it in reverse and tried to stop, my pedal would have gone all the way to the floor. So you have to make sure that you pump the pedal, get the pedal nice and high again. Okay, that's it, guys. I think I covered everything for now. Lots to learn, but for what we're doing and the time we have and so on, I'll see if I can think of anything else, but I think that's it.